Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin Daf Samech Daled, and we're starting at a new Mishnah, 2 lines down from the top. Yiratzon that all of our learning, each word should be a schus for the matzav in Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah says, Kidashti es biti. If a man says, I married off my daughter, and not only that, Kidashtiha vige rashtiha, I married her off and then I facilitated her divorce. Kshehiktana, while she was still underage. V'harei hiktana, she remains to be underage. The halacha is ne'eman, we trust the father under those circumstances. That means that she can't marry a Kohen anymore. She's divorced. That's a problem. Kidashtia v'gerashtia kshetana, a similar case where the father says that I married her off and facilitated her divorce while she was a ketana, but now v'harei gdola. So now she's a gdola. Eino ne'eman, he is not believed. What about the case of Nishbeis Ufudise? Let's say, Rahman al-Itzlan, this is Mamish today's Sugya in Eretz Yisrael. You have women, girls who have been held captives, Ufudise, Shamirachim, Bein Shiktana, Bein Shikdola, Eino Ne'eman. The halacha is that one way or the other, there's no Ne'emanus by the father there. Maishna Reisha, Maishna Seifa. Why is it that in the Reisha that we trust the father? And why is it that in the Seifa we don't trust the father? We're Samach Daled Amud Aleph, 8 lines down, a couple lines into the Gemara. So it says the Gemara, Reisha biyode. In the Reisha where it was Kidashtiha v'gerashtiha while she was a Ketana and she's still a Ketana, so that he can control. He has some aspects of control there. But Seifa, in the latter cases where we say Eino Ne'eman, that's cases number 2 and 3 of the Mishnah, there, La Biyode, he has no control because one is a case of Shivuyim, he has no control. So the Gemara says that's not true. I could come up with a case where a father puts his daughter into questionable status, and not a case of captivity, but it's still a real case. Vilo, is that really true that we don't trust a father, that a father doesn't have control to make his daughter usher? After all, in theory, it's not mutter, but in theory, a father could marry off his daughter to a chalal, and the assumption of the Gemara is that she'd be a chalala, and that would then be him making her puzzle, just like the case of Nishbeis would make her puzzle. Says the Gemara, halo kasha. That's actually not a good question from chalal. Why not? The Gemara says because ki Rebbe Dustoi ben Yehuda de Omar benos Yisrael mikva tahara lechalala. There's nothing wrong. So, Chudash, I didn't know this. There's nothing wrong, says Rabbi Dustoi ben Yehuda, with Yiddish Medel marrying a chalal. It's mutter. The halacha is that technically it's not mutter, but of course we know mamzer has to marry a mamzer suffix or a mamzer badai, but a regular Israelis can't marry a mamzer. So if I marry off a daughter to a mamzer, so maybe then I'm similar to the case of Nishbeis, and maybe I should be Ne'eman because I do have control over that. So the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Akiva, the Amar ein Kiddushin Tovsin b'chayve Laban. That in the camp of Rabbi Yehuda, no, you can't even marry off a girl to a mom. You might have thought that I could mechanically marry them, that the chalos of the Kiddushin is, the chalos is a 0. Once we're begeder chayve Laban, the halacha is that there is no marriage at all, because he holds ein Kiddushin Tovsin b'chayve Laban. We saw this sugya many months ago in Maseches Yevamos, as to whether or not a marriage only doesn't work when the marriage is begeder kares, or is it only beis or lav? Sota also. Oh, you said it 2 days ago. You're making me look bad, Stan. Although the truth is, I do fine making myself look bad without you, so I don't need your help. I distinctly don't recall things without your help. So. Okay, good. So the Gemara says that you can't say the case of mamzerus, that a father in theory could. No, a father can't in theory marry off his daughter to a mamzer, because according to Rabbi Akiva, since there's that's chayve lavin, so the kiddushin's not chal. So you can't create a scenario that just by the marriage she's going to become asura. So says the Gemara, well, wait 1 second. According to Rabbi Akiva, maybe we should say lahasiu almana lekohen gadol uchi Reb Simai. Reb Simai, within the camp of Rabbi Akiva, he has an approach by which we can say that perhaps, again, it's usher to do it, but maybe the marriage would work whereby the father does have control. Maybe he then should be Naaman if he marries off his daughter as an almana to a Kohen Gadol. And how does Reb Simai understand this? D'Tanya, we're a third of the way down, Samach Daled Amud Aleph. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nihye b'dvaro. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, how do we know that we have a case scenario where within the camp of Rabbi Akiva, who hold that chayve lavin are not chal, how do we know that we could create a scenario where a father does have control by marrying off his daughter to someone who's asura to her, making her asur? The Tanya, Rav Simai Omer, min hakol oser Rabbi Akiva mamzer. Rabbi Akiva says all cases are mamzerus, chutz me'alman l'kohen gadol. Oh, so this is what pierces the armor of Rabbi Akiva. This is the one exception. Really, Rabbi Akiva holds that all of the following cases are mamzerus. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's the one exception? This one. It's the case of almana l'kohen gadol, and therefore perhaps that marriage will work because Rabbi Akiva held that mamzerus was of a higher standard, but maybe perhaps it's just almana l'kohen gadol. Sharei Torah amra lo yikach, that you're not allowed to marry a kohen gadol is not allowed to marry an almana, and then it says v'lo yechalel chilulim ose. It does make that kohen gadol into a chalal. So perhaps we have found that possibility that our Mishnah is recommending, that we have a father who can create a scenario, albeit be'isr, where he can marry off his daughter. He has control. He should be neman, unlike our Mishnah by the case of niftes, of nishbeis ufdise, where he's not neman. Says the Gemara, Rav Yeshovav. Rav Yeshovav disagreed. He disagreed sharply with how Rav Simai understood Rabbi Akiva. So let's be super clear. Rabbi Akiva had a shita, Rav Simai had one lens, and Rabbi Shevav completely disagreed. Rabbi Shevav, Amar bo v'nitzavach al Akiva ben Yosef. We need to kick and scream about the shita of Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef. You have to be quite the wide-shouldered person to go up against the great giant of Rabbi Akiva. He might have been a farmer when he was a young man, but he was no slouch when he was an older man. So if you're going to be fighting against Rabbi Akiva, you better have a good source. And in this case, Rabbi Shevav was kicking and screaming. Shaya Omer kol she'ein lo bia b'Yisrael avlad mamzer. Rabbi Akiva also had a din that if the bia is not allowed, then the child would be a mamzer. And if that's true, even in a case of almana l'kohen gadol, granted there's no mamzerus, but it doesn't matter because once we have a status of no bia, so because the bia is asura between the alman and the kohen gadol, therefore the kid's a mamzer. So it's not mamzerus stam. It's mamzerus because of a secondary reason, and therefore even by alman the kohen gadol, so he disagreed with Rav Simai. Rav Simai said that alman the kohen gadol was an exception to mamzerus. Rabbi Akiva says no, it's not not Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shevav says that it's not an exception, and even the alman the kohen gadol is still going to be a mamzer.
So is that are the ones that are they allowed to other mamzerim, or is this still like a?
Can these people marry each other?
Yeah.
A mamzer can marry both a mamzer vadai and a mamzer suffik. Mamzer vadai amarachman avlo mamzer suffik. The other way. A mamzer can only marry a mamzer vadai.
Right.
Is that right?
That makes sense.
What's the drasha? No one second. Mamzer vadai amarachman avlo mamzer suffik. I think that's correct. Not 100% sure, but I think a mamzer can only marry another mamzer.
But this is.
By the way, people, this is the discussion. Like, should you make like a website for mamzerim to get married? Like, this is a shiloh because their kids. It's not so pashut. Like you're perpetuating something, but then they die lonely. That means that they never have a chance. They never marry. Nothing. It's not pashut. It's not going to be an OU initiative anytime soon. That's for sure.
No, but I guess my question is more along the lines of: are they considered the same mamzer so that they can marry someone who was from with somebody who wasn't her husband?
Yeah, mamzer is a mamzer. According to Rabbi Akiva, the mamzer list is very broad. Yeah, all of them are the same tipus. Yeah, they're all the same. Yeah, in theory. I don't know if it might be mutter. Technically, it might not be good public policy, but it would be mutter for them to marry l'chora, seemingly. So says the Gemara halfway down, 2 lines before the wide lines. I could understand this shita, Rav Yeshevav. I could understand that if he's saying his own shita, all of this makes perfect sense. But if you want to say that he's just trying to elbow Rav Simai and his understanding of Rabbi Akiva out of the way, it wouldn't help because Rabbi Yadol Hasio l'chayve aseh. This is a new lens that if you just say the machlokes is between Rabbi Sheva and Rabbi Simai, how they understand Rabbi Akiva doesn't matter, because according to Rabbi Akiva, you're also going to be a mamzer for violating chai ve'aseh, which is mechudash anyways, because it's rare that an isra aseh could lead to mamzerus. We usually have like bris milah and Pesach are the rare exceptions where an aseh leads to a severe negative. This would be the next tier under because it's not karetz, but it could lead a person to mamzerus even b'chai ve'aseh. So that's one significant question, but here's a better one. Amar Ravasi says, "V'tizbara, is this even logical? Is our Mishnah, does it even make any sense? You wanted to say Reisha Mishum to be Yadohu. What was the Reisha? Let's look back at the Mishnah. A man says, Kidashti es biti, Kidashtiha v'gerashtiha kshiktana. And then we said that it's Naaman. Why did we say it was Naaman? Because we said the father had control. Says the Gemara, no, he didn't. Why not? Nahib, granted, 2/3 of the way down, second of the wide lines. Granted, Nahib biyado lekacha, but biyado lekarsha? You wanted to argue the distinction in the Mishnah between the Reisha and the Seifa. Is that in the Reisha, the father's Naaman because, he gets to decide what happens with his Ketana daughter. And in the Seifa, because there was a lack of the father's control, we tried to figure out maybe all the stuff in the middle there about the coin. Forget that. The Reisha that you said the father had control, he does not have control. The father's not allowed to force a divorce. Half. But the case scenario, he has it's like poking the right side of a balloon. All day it's gone. The fact that you can marry her is wonderful, but it doesn't mean that you're Naaman, because at the end of the day, you can't force the divorce. So that's question number 2. Ve'odin, furthermore, Ilu Amar, Ilu Amar, hi, if the man says, Delo nicha begava, if the man says, even by the Kiddushin, if the man says, I don't want to marry your Ketana daughter, the Stan said it's half-seas. It's not half-seas. It's nothing. Because you're right that I have the power to marry off my daughter. But if you don't want to marry my daughter, I can't force you to. So we made our first approach in our Mishnah was, the first case of the Mishnah was very simple. The father had control. It's Kiddushin, it's Gerushin. And the second 2 cases, the father had no control. Says the Gemara, the father has no control anywhere, not in the Reisha or in the Seifa. Because even in the Reisha, L'maisa, at the end of the day, can't force Kiddushin. You have the power to bring her to Kiddushin, but if the guy you want to propose to, tall, dark, and handsome, says, I'm not interested in your daughter, you can't force that. And the divorce also you can't force. So the last 30 lines of Gemara are scrapped. This just doesn't work. Great question by Ravashi. It's actually odd that the Gemara waited this long to ask this question because it's so obvious. Certainly the get part, and even the Kiddushin part, like they're very rational, reasonable questions. So it says Ravashi, Ravashi, Reisha, the only reason why we have any nehemanis in our Mishnah is because Rachmana Hemne, the Torah believed him in the Reisha. It's not because of any svaras that we're going to impose or overlay. It's because the Torah itself trusted him in the case of Kidashtiha v'gerashtiha kshiktana. What's the pasuk? Ki Rav Huna. Dam Rav Huna Marab. Minayin la'av shene'eman le'esor es bito min Torah. How do we know that a father is able to bring about a status of iser of his daughter from other men on a Torah level? Shenemar es bitina sati lo ish hazeh lo ish asra. When the Torah says the word li'ish, he can bring her into Kiddushin, which forbids her from other people. And hazeh hitira benisuin. He's then allowed to say, okay, now you're allowed to marry person X. And therefore, hemne rachmana le'av, but b'shvuye lo hemne. But lamaisa, when it comes to a father, that's just not the drush on the pasuk. It's not how the Chachamim understood the pasuk in Chumash. So now let's look back at our Mishnah. The first case of our Mishnah was Kidashtiya v'gerashtiya kshiktana. We said the father was Naaman. In the second case, which was similar, but now she's a Gedola, we said Eino Naaman. And in the case of Nishbesu Fadise, there too we said the father's Eino Naaman. Why is there a difference in cases 1 where he's Naaman and 2 and 3 where he's not? It's simple. Because the Torah said so. One of the best forms of parenting. I don't care what your svaras are as why. We're not Dorish time of Dekra. What is the din? The din is that Hashem trusts you. There, that's it. That's a conversation short and over. Which is very, very interesting because if we would rewrite this Gemara according to the conclusion, we would have written our Mishnah and then we would have said Ne'eman, Dichsiv, the pasuk. And oddly, the Gemara does not go that route. The Gemara takes a whole nother mahalech, and a lengthy one at that. It's 25 lines of Gemara. Why? I'm just saying that I like finding the gist of things. And if I was a gister and looking for the most synthesized version of this Gemara, it would not be this. So that's why we have Rishonim to tell us what to extract from the Havaminas. There's a famous kolbo, and based on the Gemara Maseches Shabbos, that based on the question of Dilma Megispa, and the kolbo infers from the question, not even from the answer, from the question that there's an isser to stir a pot on a kli rishon al gabe ha'esh, isser d'oraisa. So we see that from Havaminas, even from questions. Questions are not answers. But when you ask the question, it's a revelation of your values. Same thing over here. We have 25 lines of Gemara. We easily could have written it without. It would have been easier to learn. Clear. It doesn't matter. That's not the way we get to choose how Shas is built. We have a lot to learn from these 25 lines. We just don't have time to extract what we need to. But there's a lot to be said. All right. Says the Gemara as follows. We are at a new Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down. Misha Amar Bishas Misa. So the man says at the time of his death, Yeshli Banim, I have children, Naaman. However, put on your Yevamos cap. If he says Yeshli Achim, Eino Naaman. Now, I don't know what kind of marriage they had that she did not know that he did or did not have brothers. But nevertheless, if her husband, if Rachel's husband, Ruvain, is on his deathbed, and right before he kicks, he says, I have brothers. So what happens if we believe him? Yeshli, no, one or the other. If he says Yeshli Banim, we believe him because there's no halachic nafkamina. But if he says Yeshli Achim, not for Banim, she knows they're not her kids. He's saying Yeshli Banim from another marriage. But over here, the halachic nafkamina would be Yeshli Achim Eino Naaman. If he says, I have brothers that I never told you about, and they have no children, and he dies, she's a Yavama. Huge differences. So the Mishnah says, he's not Naaman. We trust him as it relates to saying that the boys are born, that he had kids from a previous marriage. No problem. But you want to tell me now on the deathbed that you have brothers, and now I'm a Yavama? The Torah says no. The Mishnah says we don't. We bifurcate it now. We say we trust him, but not over here. Okay, we have to figure this out. This is a great piece of Gemara. Says the Gemara, Alma, Ne'eman lahatir, ve'ein ne'eman le'esor. Brilliant, simple, deductive reasoning. It's clear from the Mishnah. Sorry about the cough. It's clear from the Mishnah that we believe him to say, for example, that he has sons. No problem. That's lahatir. No problem at all. No damage. But ve'ein ne'eman le'esor. He's not allowed to pipe up on his deathbed and say, I have brothers, and by the way, when I die, you're a Yavama. That doesn't work. So says the Gemara, first of all, Nema, perhaps we need to say that Masnisin delo Reb Nosson. It seems that our Mishnah is not like the Shita of Reb Nosson. We just said our Mishnah is Ne'eman lahatir and ve'ein ne'eman lesor. To Tanya, we have a brisa, the Tanakama first, and then Reb Nosson next. Bishas Kiddushin, if a man says when they get married, Amar yesh lo banim, and Bishas Misa Amar ein lo banim. So now he doesn't speak once, he speaks twice. Right before they get married, he said, I have children from a previous marriage. Right before he dies, he said, no, I don't. Or, B'shas Kiddushin Amar Ein Lo Achim, and B'shas Misa Amar Yesh Lo Achim, Ne'eman Lahatir, Ve'ein Ne'eman Lesor Divrei Rebbe. That's perfect. That's Kaftor B'ferach. That's exactly like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, the deduction that the Gemara poses from our Mishnah, that it asserts, is that we believe the Shchiv Meira, we believe the guy in his deathbed to be matir things, but not to aser his wife as a Yavama. So we see that the Tanakama in this case is a perfect match. That's a Rebbe. He's a perfect match for our Mishnah. Look at what Reb Nosson says, 6 lines from the bottom. Yeah, but it doesn't aser her. It has implications. Has implications. But the Gemara is talking about a direct impact on her. That's an indirect impact. Right? Yibum is she's trapped now. It's a different level of. In Lumdus, I'm bothered by the Ne'emanus piece. Like, why is it that his words matter as it relates to Banim, and therefore, to your point, things change in Yerusha. Masha'en came when it comes to Yibum. we broadly, the royal we think more categorically. You're either Naaman or you're not. And what the Gemara is saying is, okay, I hear you, but it's not always so simple to do that. We need to assess when you're Naaman, how it impacts other scenarios. Your Naaman, we believe you in general, but your Naamanus has a limit, which is that you can't say something on your deathbed that makes your wife, soon to be widow, a Yavama. That you can't do. That you can't do. But Reb Nosson argues with this. Reb Nosson argues and says, no, it's not correct. Af Naaman lesor. So perhaps, says the Gemara, maybe our Mishnah is not Reb Nosson, because our Mishnah holds Naaman lahatir ve'ein Naaman lesor. But the Brisa holds in the name of Reb Nosson of Af Naaman lesor, meaning according to Reb Nosson, it would be the case that if a husband said on his deathbed, by the way, I have brothers, she's a Yavama. Zika is instantaneous upon death. She can't marry anybody other than a brother. She chalitza, even whatever, a get, whatever the case may be. So is it correct to say that our Mishnah is not like Reb Nosson? Seems that way. Says the Gemara, 6 lines from the bottom. Amar Rava, no, shiny hasam. The case of our Mishnah and the case of the ensuing Brisa are different. Kevan de b'shas misa kahadarbe, since on his deathbed he changed what he initially said. Ema, I should now argue kushta ka'amar. Perhaps now it's the case that he's telling the truth. It's that last minute honesty. You're like, I forgot to tell you. I really feel bad, and I'm going to Olama MS, and I want to make sure that I go there with a clean slate. I lied. So perhaps the Gemara recommends in the name of Rava that when we have, as the Brisa suggests, a claim by Kiddushin and then a claim by death, when there are two claims that differ from one another, we believe the second one, Ema Kushta Kamar. And Amar Le Abaye, that's adorable, that's great, but the Lav Kol Dekain Hu, this should be a Kol Shekain. Hashta, Uma Hasam Deka Meira Lele Dibure, Amris Kushta Kamar. In the case of the Brisa that began in our Gemara, where we had someone talking right at the time of Kiddushin, a husband said, for example, I have no brothers. And then at the time of Misa, he says, I do have brothers. There, it's Meira Leila Dibure. He for sure lied in the first case, if you're saying that you trust him. If that's true, then Masnisin de lo kamar Leila Dibure, lo kol shekain. Then in the case scenario where you have someone who didn't have conflicting comments, because he didn't have comment number 1 that says, I have no brothers, and then comment number 2 that says, I have brothers. If you're going to say that at Kiddushin he says he has no brothers, and by Misa he says he has brothers, and you believe him when he has conflicting comments, you should for sure believe him when he doesn't have conflicting comments. If all he says, which is our Mishnah, just says at the time of death, by the way, I have brothers. Why does our Mishnah say no Naaman? If you're willing to believe the guy when he for sure lied, one of them isn't true by the Kiddushin or the Misa, then for sure we should believe him when he never lied. So says the Gemara, therefore, what? Doesn't matter. I don't think it matters. No, Yibum would apply with one brother, and Yerusha would apply with one. It's true both in the Brisa and in the Mishnah, by the way. It's at least consistent, but I assume it's just Lashon B'nai Adam. There's a remes to that on the next page in an unrelated sugya, but we'll see. Whatever. I don't have a good answer for you. So the Gemara therefore says this is not a good svara. Ela Amar Abaye, how then do we distinguish between our Mishnah and the Brisa? The Gemara says 3 lines from the bottom, Masnisen, in our Mishnah, de lo muchsak lan be'achi, velo muchsak lan be'bane. In our Mishnah, the assumption was a 0. We don't have any knowledge of whether or not he had brothers or whether or not he had a son. And therefore, de amrina and kevan de lo muchsak lan be'bane, velo be'achi, since the assumption was that he didn't have these things, then when he is Omar Yeshli Banim, Naaman, Yeshli Achem Eno Naaman, because Lav Kol Kimene to Aserle, Akule Alma. It's not fair that if the Chazaka was the other way, to Aser her. So here the Gemara is giving a different distinction. In our Mishnah, we have a Chazaka. The Chazaka is what she assumed for every day of her marriage until the day that this husband died. Let's say they've been married for 90 years. Please God. Right before he dies, he said, by the way, I have brothers and they're alive. So says the Gemara, you're up against the chazaka. It's not stam, are you neman, are you not neman? The ne'emanus of you saying that he has a brother, the husband saying he has a brother, is against a chazaka of him not having a brother. It's not stam in a vacuum. Nothing's in a vacuum in halacha. The context is that for 89.9 years of their marriage, the chazaka was that there was no brother. You cannot show up in the 11th hour and say, I have a brother. You can't do that because you're going against the chazaka. Not a fairness question. It's not right. Your ne'emanus is against the chazaka. You can't do that. The chazaka wins. But brisa, in regards to the brisa, as we turn to the top of Samach Daled Amud Beis, there the muchsaklan be'achi. There, remember, he spoke at the time of Kiddushin and said he had brothers. The lo muchsaklan be'bani. Therefore, and he didn't have an assumption of brothers. And then the amrinan mali l'shaker. And I said, I have no reason to lie. Micah Amar, what does that mean? So really what it means is lemifta miyavam matzi Amar patran alach begita. What's the mali l'shaker? Why should I bother lying? I don't have to lie. If I want to get her out of this whole scenario, I could just give her a get. Now, this becomes a machlokes Rebbe and Reb Nosson. Rebbe savar mali l'shaker. The svara of mali l'shaker, this is a very long piece of Gemara. The svara of mali l'shaker is so strong, it's ki edim dami. Vasu edim and akre chazaka. The svara of saying, why would I bother lying? I can solve this problem another way, has the halachic equivalence of edus. Reb Nosson savar mali l'shaker ki chazaka dami. Lo asi chazaka ve'akara chazaka legar. Therefore, Reb Nosson says, the reason why I say that it's still heter, it's a chazaka against a chazaka. So when we have edim against chazaka, edim is more powerful, good to go. When it's chazaka and chazaka, so then we're stuck. We're just stuck. Okay, let's continue. 7 lines down, Samach Daled Amud Beis at a new Mishnah. That cup's empty. Hamakadesh is bito stam. Ein habogros bichlal. If a man, I have those. I just don't. No, it's fine. Thank you. I brought a couple of extras. Man marries off his daughter without referencing which daughter we're talking about. Ein habogros bichlal. We don't include the older daughters. The reason we don't include the older daughters is because they're older. He has no right to marry them off. Once they're a gedola, they have to marry themselves off. They have to accept Kiddushin on their own. Now, let's get into a Gemara. We saw this earlier in the Masechta. What daf was it on? No. This was not. I mean, it might have been in the Dharm. We saw this in this Masechta for sure. Okay. We did. I'm not going crazy here. Does Rashi talk about it? I just have to verify that I'm not crazy. Maybe you're crazy. Here? Where do you see that? Oh, Gam Zeh Sham. That's what the Maseches Shas says. I missed that. Sorry. Thank you. Okay. I feel a little bit better. What does the Mishnah say? 8 lines down. A man has 2 daughters from 2 wives. I'm going to frame this out. The daughters from wife number 1 are 22 and 21. The daughters from wife number 2 are 20 and 19. He has 4 daughters. He had 2 daughters in a row, Irish twins, followed by getting married and having another set of Irish twins. Says the Gemara, Amar kidashti es biti hagdola. He has 4 daughters, 22, 21 from wife number 1, 20 and 19 from wife number 2. And he says, I married off my older daughter. Ve'ini yodea im gedola shebigdolos, o gedola shebiktanos, o bigdola, o ktana shebigdolos, shigdola min agdola, shebiktanos. So it says the Gemara as follows. Mishnah says there's 4 girls. When I say that I married off the gedola, it could be the 22-year-old because she's older than the 21-year-old. It could be the 20-year-old because she's older than the 19-year-old. And it could be the 21-year-old who's the younger daughter of the older pair because she's older than both of the younger ones. In other words, the older 3 daughters are all older than someone. So, children number 1 from Rachel, 22 and 21, both of them could be older because they're older than the younger. The older daughter of the younger pair, who is 20, is older than the 19-year-old. So the Mishnah says, we'll soon see that this is the sheet of Reb Meir, Kula Nasuros, Chutz min Aktana Shebektanos, Di Reb Meir. Rabbi Meir says that if I loosely use the language of Gedolos, so of my 4 daughters, the 3 older ones are all older than someone. The 21, what? They're all possible. And I said Gedolos. I don't know. I was in the clouds. 1 l'chaim too many. I have no idea what happened. So the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Meir, all 3 older girls are stuck. Getting whatever the nafkaminas are. Rabbi Yossi Omer, no. Kulan mutaros chutz min ha'gedolah shebegedolos. He argues and says, obviously, we're talking about the oldest girl. Obviously. We'll see soon why this is the case. Rabbi Meir Omer, kulan mutaros chutz min ha'gedolah shebegedolos. Next case. Let's say reverse. Kidashti as biti haketana. Ve'eni yodea im ketana shebektanos. I don't know if it's my 19-year-old, the youngest of the youngest, Oktana Shebegdolos, the 21-year-old who's younger than her older sister from my first marriage, Ogdola Shebektanos, or the older daughter of the second marriage, Shiktana Minaktana. Ogdola Shebektanos, Shiktana Minaktana Shebegdolos, or my daughter who's 20 from the second marriage, who's younger than both of the older girls, Kulan Asur Schutz Minagdola Shebegdolos, Tivi Rab Meir. Meir again says, if I say Ktanos, it can be any of the younger 3. Don't know which one, because all of them are younger than someone, except for the Gedolah Shebegdolos. Rav Yossi keeps his party line, and he says, instead of saying everybody's usher, Rav Yossi Omer Kulan Mutaros Chutz Min Aktana Shebegtanos. Okay, now, in the first case, we had spoken about a father who was marrying off his gedolos. Says the Gemara, Haktanos bichlal shamas mina kiddushin she'ein mesur and labia havu kiddushin. If in fact a man has many younger daughters, and you're going to say that they're possibly married, you can't sleep with any of those women because they're sisters. So if a man has numerous younger daughters, we saw this machlokes already, that if a man is not able to sleep with the woman with whom he is getting married to, then the marriage is not a marriage. So what we see from here is shamas mina kiddushin she'ein mesur and labia havu kiddushin. We see as an inference, a distant inference from our case. It must be the case that the author of our Mishnah holds that a marriage, even where one cannot consummate the marriage with intimacy, the halacha is that seemingly they're still married. Says the Gemara Lav Dafka, halfway down, 3 lines into the new Gemara, Hacha b'mayaskinan she'ein sham ela gedola v'ktana. Perhaps we're not talking about a complex case where there are so many daughters and there's multiple younger daughters. Why? Because maybe we're only talking about a case where there's 2 girls. One's 14 and one's 11. And then you can't make your inference about the Isser Bia. You have no idea. Says the Gemara, how can you say that after all? Bogros ktani. So our Mishnah says that we're talking about Bogros. Look at the Mishnah 6 lines down on this page. Hamakadesh es bitos tam ein habogros plural. Shouldn't we therefore assume that if there's plural older girls, that there's plural younger girls? Says the Gemara, no, that's ridiculous. My bogros to Alma. Just means girls in general. It wasn't meant to be our specific reference to teach us anything about whether or not Bia Shemasur Kedushin is considered to be Kiddushin. That's not the right language. Kiddushin She'ein Masur and Labia, whether or not there's Kiddushin. So my bogros to Alma. Says the Gemara, well, bogros, pshita bogros, might be the tie. What are you going to do for an older girl? She's 13. She's on her own. She's 12. Goodbye. My daughter just had her bas mitzvah yesterday. I cannot marry her off anymore. What?
All the ages that you gave, the child has no control. 20, 22, 21, 2019.
It's 100% true. It would have to be younger. Either that or they were appointed in shlichus. But you're correct. I gave the wrong ages. It would have been smarter to do 11, 10, 9, and 8. Michael's for sure right. Unless, again, the only unless is that the dog. It's not what was meant to be what you just said. That's correct. Should be younger ages. In theory, it could work if a daughter would appoint her father as a messenger. But you're right. I should have given the appropriate age. I didn't think about that. That's a great point. Thank you. So says the Gemara, why would we be talking about bogros ever? It's obvious that a father is not able to control what his older daughter does. I think we all know that. So the Gemara says, 2/3 of the way down. So my daughter at her bas mitzvah, and her bas mitzvah speech, Dad, I want you to be my messenger to marry me off. Then I'm allowed to. But without her rishus, I'm not allowed to marry off that daughter. But what might I have thought? when a daughter, an older daughter, does in fact appoint me as a shliach, but I also have a younger daughter. So says the Gemara, I might have thought that when I accept Kiddushin, it's for that older daughter who appointed me as a shliach. Kamash malanda lo shavik inish midi di isle hana mine, the avid midi de lesle hana mine. A father is not going to do that, because with the older daughter, even if the older daughter gives me rishus, where do the dineros go? For the older daughter, they go to the father. I mean, they go to the daughter. I would not, because I'm a terrible father, seems the Gemara to say, I would not marry off my older daughter when I could marry off my older daughter and make bank. I will not marry off my older daughter where I will make no money when I could marry off my younger daughter and make the Kiddushin. That's what the Gemara says. I'm just saying that's bad parenting. That's not right. What about Lot? Shilas. But they were young. They were super young. We don't know. How old was Rachel and Leah? How old, does anybody know? Saying they were katanos. I have no idea. Says the Gemara, well, perhaps that older daughter is a giving older daughter. Mi lo askinon de amra le kiddushai loch. Oh, Tati, I'll give you a few bucks. You marry me off, and you can have the kiddushin, says my 12-year-old daughter. The Gemara says, "Va'afilu hachi." Don't worry about it. Afilu hachi lo shavik. Doesn't matter. Lo shavik inish mitzvah de ramye alei. A father is not going to lose the opportunity. Is not going to lose the opportunity to get a mitzvah of marrying off his younger daughter, vavid mitzvah de lo ramye alei, and be involved in a mitzvah that isn't incumbent upon him. His older daughter getting married is no longer the father's responsibility. That is now the daughter's responsibility. And that brings us to the next two dots. The Gemara says 3/4 of the way down, 2 lines into the wide lines, we had said the cases of Misha Yesh Lo Shtei Kite Banos. And if you'll recall, we presented 2 cases in our Mishnah. Remember the 4 daughters? Let's take Michael's Knech, that they are 11, 10, 9, and 8. That's a much better way to frame it. But I still have a rule that I don't go back and edit my, I have yet to do it. We're good to go. So Lamaisa, let's say the 11-year-old, we gave 2 cases. What if a father says, I'm hereby marrying my oldest, and I don't remember what I meant by oldest, or I presented the next case of I hereby marry off my youngest, and I don't know which one it was. In both of those cases, we saw separate machlokos between Rav Meir and Rav Yossi. The Gemara wants to know why that's the case. Why did the Mishnah present 2? They're the same thing. Rav Meir said 3 out of 4 were guilty, were married, and 1 wasn't. Rav Yossi says 1 out of 4 is married, and he said it in both cases. Ma'naf kamina. So it says the Gemara, the 2 dots fit tzricha. The Yashmin and Kamaisa. If I only had the first case where I'm referring to the older daughter, behach ka'amar Rav Meir. The kevan deika zutra mina lahach gdola karila. Because there are those that are younger than any of the older ones, therefore, even the 9-year-old is older than the 8-year-old, therefore all 3 of them are considered to be gdolos. Aval beha, in the reverse case, when we're referring only to a ktana, a mamodi le Rabbi Yossi, the ktana, lahach ktana, the kulu karila. Everybody calls the youngest. I for sure do that. This is my baby. I talk about that child, even though he's not a baby. Different lexicon. We refer to them differently. V'yitmar baha, if we only had them.
It's 4 girls and 7.
First 2 are from marriage number 1. What's in the guy's head? Those are my kids. In his head, they're what the Gemara is saying is that it's not nishpashut. What the Gemara is saying though is that there's a difference between calling your child your oldest and your youngest. It's the mazinka, like your brain is a little different about the little one. That's what the Gemara implies, and therefore, because of that, maybe there's no machlok. You're correct. With wife number 1, With wife number 1, our youngest is the 9-year-old. And with wife number 2, our young, you're correct. But the Gemara doesn't make your distinction. You're correct. I hear what you're saying. It just didn't play out that way. 5 lines into the wide lines. And with this, we're going to stop. I really should be doing more, but I'm coughing up a lung. So we're just going to stop. If we only had the machlokes Rav Meir, Rav Yossi in the latter case, Hak Amar Rav Yossi, maybe only in the latter case, in the case of that our Mishnah was discussing, when a father said, I married off my daughter and she's a ketana. Aval behach, in the other case, in the case where the father said, I married off my older daughter, perhaps they would agree. The Gemara doesn't even insert svaras to each of the tzadim. I and Sham and the Rishonim how to navigate this, but there could be the same svaras l'kan u'l'kan. Could just be the reverse, that we refer to the gedola. Oh, this is my b'ni b'chori, right? So now we can flip the svaras in the opposite direction. We'll stop right here. Tomorrow is going to be a recording one way or the other, because I have to teach a class at that time. And we'll pick up at Lamemra 8 lines from the bottom. Wishing you all a beautiful night.